Mr. President, it's Thursday, and that means it's typically time for me to recognize somebody in my state who has made a big difference for Alaska, sometimes someone who's made a big difference for America. And we like to call that person the Alaskan of the Week. Now for the pages, I know this is your favorite time of the week because these are usually great stories about great Alaskans, great Americans. And today, I guarantee you, I am not going to disappoint with talking about another great Alaskan. Now, I like to brag about Alaska, its beauty, its mystique, its great people, its vastness, welcoming communities, tough people, tough environment. Everybody should visit. If you're watching, come on up in the winter, by the way, not just the summer. The northern lights are out. You can see them. They're beautiful. We actually get a lot of tourists in the winter, believe it or not. But there's something else that's very unique about my state, very special, and it is this. It's one of the most patriotic states in the entire country. More veterans per capita than any state in America. So, we like to brag about that. I certainly like to brag about that. My constituents serve in the military, and their families sacrifice. And so many of these veterans, like they do throughout the country, so many of our Alaskan veterans devote time, energy, and resources to giving back to their community, but to also helping other veterans. So, Mr. President, we all know a few weeks ago we celebrated Veterans Day, and as part of that celebration, as part of our Alaskan of the Week series, I want to recognize as today's Alaskan of the Week, Mr. Ron Travis, along with his wife Linda, and what they have done in terms of spending years making a difference for American veterans, Alaskan veterans, hundreds, if not thousands. So let me tell you a little bit about Ron. He came from a patriotic family. His father fought in World War II. His mother was a member of the VFW Auxiliary, and in 1961, Ron joined the Navy, where he served from 1960 to 1964 as a machinist mate, third class on the USS Providence. This was a guided missile cruiser and was the first U.S. Navy ship to travel up the Saigon River and park in front of Saigon during the Vietnam War. So he's a Vietnam vet. We love our Vietnam vets. After he got out of the military, he used a GI Bill to go to college at what was then Eastern Washington College in 1967. Bit of a lot of turmoil during that time in our country, particularly on college campuses. So this is during the height of the Vietnam War, a lot of the protests. And when he was in college, like so many Vietnam veterans, he was certainly upset to see a lot of the protests. He was particularly infuriated to see his professors canceling class so they could join the protesters. Quote, a lot of our professors we had didn't even know where Vietnam was, but they went out and protested. However, there was a rule on campus that even if one student showed up for class, that the professor couldn't cancel the class to join the protesters. So Ron and other veterans joined a club. They organized a club at their university to make sure there was a veteran in every classroom. Pretty good idea. Keep the professors doing what they're supposed to be doing, teaching. They also helped veterans pay for books they needed and to help them with their classes. Again, veterans helping veterans is what Ron's been doing his whole life. It turned into the biggest club on campus. Now, there was another club on campus, kind of infamous, the Students for Democratic Society, better known as the SDS, not necessarily the most pro-military group in the country at the time, to say the least. And at one point, they tried to take over the Veterans Club's canteen. But that didn't work. As Ron said, they forgot one thing. We would fight for what we believed in. We had already done that. Now, unfortunately, it never came to blows. He's quick to point that out, but the SDS certainly backed down to Rod's Veterans Club. So eventually, Ron made his way up to the great state of Alaska to work on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Like so many people who come up to our state, he fell in love with it. He brought his wife, Linda, to Alaska to settle. They settled in a wonderful community called Big Lake. It's about an hour's drive from Anchorage, and they made a wonderful life for themselves. They built a cabin off the grid. They raised their kids in Alaska. Ron worked as a mechanic all across the state, then as a parole officer. Eventually, he realized that he had health issues associated with his service in Vietnam, exposure to Agent Orange. The American Legion advocated for him to get help, so he joined the American Legion, Post 35 in particular, in Wasilla, Alaska, and began to get more and more involved in veterans issues, eventually becoming the commander of the post. And then again, duty called, another time for Ron, to help with regard to our veterans. Now, Mr. President, no doubt you and most other people watching have heard about this great network of Americans called the Honor Flight Network. This has chapters in individual states that bring veterans here to Washington, D.C. at no cost to the veteran so they can visit the memorials that in many ways they've dedicated their lives to. The World War II Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial. It's an outstanding program. It started with bringing World War II veterans here who haven't seen the wonderful World War II Memorial here on the Mall that was built for them and finished in 2004. Now, because of our distance, Alaska's distance, thousands of miles, literally, from D.C., we did not have a program. Despite having all these veterans, we did not have an honor flight program. Well, guess who changed that? Ron and his wife, Linda. They were at a veterans facility when they were down in Washington State visiting Ron's mother at a rest home. And at that facility, they met another veteran. He told them all about the honor flight program, showed them pictures of a recent trip, and said, you know what? Alaska needs to do this. Alaska needs to do this. Ron said, someone should start one. Someone should start one of these programs. He looked at his wife, and they realized they were going to start it. And the Last Frontier Honor Flight Program was born. 2 times every year, since 2013, they organize a trip for up to 25 veterans, their escorts, a photographer, a doctor, 2 staff members, and they come to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorial, the different memorials for our veterans living in Alaska, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. All told, they have organized trips for 286 veterans. 155 of them fought in World War II, just from Alaska. And it's not an easy flight, especially for some of our older veterans, but they're all doing it. Ron and Linda's love and care and dedication. His goal is to try to reach out to as many World War II veterans as they can while they're still with us. And of course, it's a trip of a lifetime for so many of these veterans. A wonderful gift, one veteran called it. Others have referred to it as their final mission. Ron says that the veterans often shed a tear in front of the World War II memorial. It takes them by surprise, he said. They often don't realize how much they feel until they see it. It's a healing mission and trip for them. They do a lot of these things during these trips. It's just an honor to be part of it. Now, Mr. President, I try to see Ron and his team every time they come to Alaska or come to Washington, D.C. We usually greet them with a couple dozen donuts when they're out looking at these wonderful memorials. Ron recalls one particularly emotional moment with one of the World War II veterans he brought from Alaska when he was in front of the World War II memorial, when he was approached by a woman who was also visiting the memorial. He saw them talking, then they hugged, then they cried. Total strangers. What was going on there, Mr. President? This woman's parents had been at the concentration camp Dachau. The veteran, the World War II veteran, the Alaskan veteran, had been part of the unit that liberated the camp. Her parents, she said, were in some ways alive because of what he and his unit did to liberate them. Right here, on the mall. Powerful. Ron credits the community in Alaska for making these trips possible. Of course, he and Linda are being humble, but there's been great community involvement. Alaska Airlines pays for the flights for the veterans and offers discounts for the escorts. Various community organizations and veterans groups and businesses help pay for the hotel rooms and all of the food. Volunteers and board members come together to raise money. The community that helps with these trips includes our active duty and reserve forces in Alaska. And when you're home and they come home, many of whom are in wheelchairs, hundreds of Alaskans come out to greet them in the airport. It's great. It's wonderful. It's the community of my state and really the community of this great country coming together. But it needs leaders. It needs leaders. And Ron and Linda have been those leaders, founding the Last Frontier Honor Flight. So I want to thank Ron and Linda for their great service to Alaska, great service to their country, great service to our veterans, for all that they've done, and congratulate them on being our Alaskans of the Week. I yield the floor.